Hi, Sally-Shakti, and for my Writing and Thriving video today, I'm going to be reading from Dub, Finding Ceremony by Alexis Pauline Gumbs. I'm still in the process of reading this book. You can see my bookmark there. And I hadn't been familiar with Alexis Pauline Gumbs before I came to this book, but this book, Dub, particularly specifically, was recommended to me by several of my friends who I write with and who I've been supporting with their writing. If this book had been published a few years earlier, it was published in 2020, just after I finished my PhD. If it had been published whilst I was working on my PhD, I think I would have come to it a lot sooner and had more sense of focus. As it is, I'm coming to it raw. The 3 years that have elapsed since I completed my PhD have been, for me as well as for everyone, the last 3 years since 2020, complete and total and continual process of evolution and transformation. I have lived in community. I've spent months and years doing full-time embodied healing, somatic inquiry, group therapy, on both sides of the group room, both as participant and supporting the practitioners. I've been mostly in a transient nomadic state with my own living situation, which I've started to share more about, especially when I was with the horses recently, which I really loved. And my books, the majority of my books have been in storage for the majority of that time. And that's the majority of the books I have left after letting the majority of my books go during my PhD, after my PhD. I was in a process of feeling like I needed to travel light and let go. So I let go of probably 2/3 of my book collection after my PhD. And of what's left, probably 90% has been in storage for the majority of the last 3 years, which has taken me a lot, in many ways, out of the writerly practices, and especially the scholarly and critical practices that I was very much immersed in throughout my PhD process. But it's brought me a lot more back to my body, which is ultimately what my own poetic practice and performance was always designed to do. And so I come to this book, Dub, without so much of the critical thinking that was so much part of me and my writing and my practice and my identity whilst I was doing my PhD. And I come to it more embodied, more from a place of inquiry and wonder and openness and receptivity, which are the qualities I was looking to cultivate through my practice and through my reading. But I feel like I've deepened into this aspect of myself in unfathomable ways in the last 3 years. And that's the right way to approach this book. This book does have a scholarly and a critical context, but it exists to invite a more embodied and open inquiry. The book itself is the result of a daily writing practice that Alexis Pauline Gumbs committed to for a period of 300 days. And from what I can tell, she was writing with a selection of, it says here, after and with published uncollected essays and one interview with Sylvia Wynter. And the book starts with a note about Alexis Pauline Gumbs' writing practice and process, and it begins with a quote from Sylvia Wynter that says, "So I have to be realistic and say, how can I expect people whose discipline is their identity to accept this hybrid model when what we are being faced with is the total removal of their discipline as an autonomous field of inquiry? But then think of the dazzling creativity of the alternative challenge that would be opened up." So this book in so many ways does so much of what I was curious about during my PhD study and what I still support writers with in their own thesis writing now. And it does so much more than that. This is a book that explores colonialism, identity, ancestry, and inheritance in such a deep and profound way, in which, like all of the pieces of writing that I prefer, like all of the writing and practices that I prefer, there's so much in its silence and in its in what is unsaid. I can't say so much more about this, and I don't really want to. I really want to share with you the words that are written here, just to give the context that this is, from what I'm sensing, a conversation between Alexis Pauline Gumbs and those who we might think of as our ancestors, collectively and personally. And that conversation, that dialogue, happens through the writing process. I'm going to read a few sections. Request. We would like it if you wrote us poems. We would like it if you wrote us long life sentences. We would like it if you broke sentences and gave us more life than you or we were told could be contained. We would like it if you remained. We would like it if you showed up every day. We would like it if you drank water. We would love it if you would turn off your phone. We would sincerely appreciate it if you stopped pretending to be alone. Commitment. We promise to wake you up if you think you won't, we promise to wake you up if we think you won't get the point of the dream. We promise to show up if you show up every day. We promise to make you feel sick when you lie to yourself. We promise to let love through if it's love you came to do. We promise to make time flexible if you give us all your time. We promise to think of you more often than you think of us. We promise to remember you when you forget. We promise to be wherever and in everything you haven't noticed yet. We promise to be we even one by one. We promise to outsmart your mind. We promise to overlaugh your heart. We promise to echo over your voice. We promise you everything, everything, all we ask. Instructions. Tell them about the eastern shore and running. Tell them about underneath the boat, the hard shell breaking open, the land so wet it's water, the water so hard we live on it most of the day. Tell them how we left and how we stayed. Tell them about the whales, but tell them using the oyster shell. Tell them about wampum and waiting. Tell them about the salted dirt within you. Tell them how we found each other again. Tell them about the shells. Tell them about the giant turtle shells. Tell them about the soup we made in shells when we needed armor. Tell them why we needed armor and what we did before the harm. Tell them about flint, magic, coral, God, and fire, and what we left to tell the tale. Tell them about the whales and how they swam next to us singing, how they breathed sometimes bigger than the boats, what they taught us about evolution, how they clicked sometimes louder than the chains, how they taught us to make time out of salt, how they deepened our lungs, opened the top of our heads, how they made their whole bodies into drums to show us how it would be. Tell them who taught you to dream, to stay, to breathe, and then show them who taught you to leave. Dub refers to not only the rhythms and the repetitions, but the memory and the weaving back and forth of memory and the ancestors, the calling, the voices, the stories, the rhythm and the repetition. There's so much beauty and depth and richness in this book, and so much power as it speaks about colonialism, enslavement, forced migration, brutality and murder, violence. It speaks with voices of specificity and collectivity. And it speaks in rhythms like the ocean waves. And when it gives those instructions and those invitations, I feel personally entreated and reminded to do those things, those acts of self-care, like drink water, take time, imagine, create, and remember to do things differently for the sake of those who came before and those who are yet to come. This book, perhaps more than any other so far, has also given me a sense, a real deep sense of not only compassion for those who came before me, but of their real strength, of their commitment to keep going, of their commitment to survival, to care, for self and others, and that their care and their commitment for those of us who have come after, is a fire and a torch and a light and a responsibility that we can carry now and we can take up now. And I'm here by the fire because my practice as I'm reading this book is to breathe that fire, to find it again in myself, to know that those who came before me had strength and fire and courage and commitment, and that their courage and their love have given me life now, so that I might tell stories and make changes and do things differently. And that's exactly what Alexis Pauline Gumbs is doing in this book, and I'm finding it very powerful, very moving, and deeply, deeply beautiful to hear the voices of those ancestors, voices of specificity, those ancestors who were taken and enslaved, and the voices of collectivity, those ancestors who come to us all to be heard. And not only to be heard, but to be witnessed and to remind us that we are loved. Thank you so much for being here. I'm sending you lots of love.